The marble floor beneath my heels felt colder than it should have been for a June evening. I shifted my weight from one aching foot to the other, trying to ignore the way my toes screamed inside the borrowed pumps, 2 sizes too small, but they matched the navy dress I'd found at the thrift store last week. Presentation mattered at Romano & Associates, even for someone like me who existed in the shadows of the 42nd floor, filing documents nobody would ever read, and answering phones that rarely rang for my extension. The scent of expensive cologne and leather hung heavy in the reception area, mixing with the faint metallic tang of the air conditioning that worked overtime to combat the Manhattan heat. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of my desk, steadying myself as another wave of exhaustion rolled through me. 3 jobs. That's what it took to keep my head above water in this city that chewed up girls like me and spit them out before they even realized they were drowning. Miss Chen, have you finished organizing the Castellano files? Mr. Romano's voice cut through my fog, sharp and impatient. I looked up to find him standing in the doorway of his corner office, his gray suit immaculate, his expression suggesting I was already failing at a task I'd completed an hour ago. Yes, sir. They're on your desk, alphabetized and dated. He grunted, disappearing back into his domain without another word. That was the extent of our interactions. Curt questions, mechanical answers, the occasional criticism delivered with the warmth of a January blizzard. I was furniture to him. Useful, replaceable furniture. The elevator chimed, its polished doors sliding open with a whisper of expensive machinery. I didn't look up immediately, didn't need to. The shift in air pressure, the sudden weight of attention, told me someone important had arrived. It wasn't until the receptionist, Denise, inhaled sharply that I raised my eyes. 3 men stepped into the reception area, but only one mattered. He moved like darkness given form, all sharp angles and controlled power wrapped in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. Black hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble. Strong jaw, straight nose, lips pressed into a line that suggested he smiled rarely and never without purpose. But it was his eyes that pinned me in place. Dark, almost black, they swept across the room with the casual assessment of a predator cataloging prey. Behind him, 2 men flanked him like extensions of his shadow. One was built like a refrigerator, neck thick as a tree trunk, hands that could crush bone without effort. The other was leaner, his gaze constantly moving, scanning exits and entrances with military precision. Both wore earpieces. Both moved with the synchronized grace of men who'd worked together so long, they'd become a single organism. The air changed. It tasted different now, charged with something dangerous and electric that made the hair on my arms stand up beneath my cardigan. Mr. Romano is expecting me. His voice was silk over steel, accented. Italian, I thought, though I'd never been anywhere to know for certain. Each word precisely measured, economical, as though speech itself was a currency he rationed carefully. Denise stammered something about announcing him, her fingers trembling as she reached for the phone. But he was already moving past her desk, past mine, his cologne washing over me in a wave. Cedar and something darker. Something that smelled like smoke and old churches and secrets buried deep. I should have looked away. Should have returned to the spreadsheet glowing on my computer screen, to the safe monotony of data entry and irrelevance. Instead, I found myself frozen, watching as he paused, just for a heartbeat, beside my desk. Those obsidian eyes found mine. Time stretched. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang unanswered, but in that moment, the world contracted to the space between us, to the weight of his gaze, as it traced my face with an intensity that felt physical, not leering, not the greasy assessment I'd learned to deflect from men on the subway. This was different, darker, like being studied by something ancient and patient and utterly certain of its own power. Then he was gone, swept into Romano's office with his sentinels, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. I released a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "Holy shit," Denise whispered, leaning across the partition that separated our desks. "Do you know who that is?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Dominic Valentino," She said the name like a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell which. He owns half of Manhattan. The other half is too scared to admit he doesn't own them too. She lowered her voice further, glancing toward Romano's door. My cousin works at Lux. You know, that club in Tribeca? She says Valentino walks in and everyone stops breathing. Says he's connected to, you know. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. In a city like New York, some things went without saying. Some names carried weight that pressed down on you like deep water, drowning out questions before you could voice them. I turned back to my computer, fingers finding the keyboard through muscle memory alone. But the numbers on the screen might as well have been hieroglyphics. All I could see were those eyes, that moment of connection that had felt less like recognition and more like claiming. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my screen count down each second, hyper-aware of the muffled voices behind Romano's door, of the way the receptionist kept glancing at me with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. When the door finally opened, I kept my eyes down. Professional, invisible, safe. But he stopped at my desk again. Miss Chen. Not a question. He knew my name, though we'd never been introduced, though I was nobody worth knowing. The realization sent ice down my spine. You work late hours. It wasn't really a statement that required response, but his silence demanded one anyway. I looked up, found him studying me with that same unsettling intensity, his bodyguards positioned at careful angles that blocked us from Denise's view, from the security cameras mounted in the corners. The work requires it, sir. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or amusement at my expense. Dedication is rare, valuable. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a card that gleamed black in the overhead lights. No name, just a phone number embossed in silver. You need anything, you call this number. Anything at all. He placed it on my desk before I could refuse, his fingers brushing the surface inches from my own. Then he was moving again, his small army falling into formation around him, and I was left staring at a business card that felt heavier than it should, that seemed to pulse with implications I was too naive or too terrified to unpack. The elevator doors closed on Dominic Valentino, and the office released a collective breath. What did he give you? Denise materialized beside my desk, eyes wide with curiosity, and something else. Concern, maybe, or warning. Nothing. I slipped the card into my purse, suddenly desperate to hide it, to pretend the last hour hadn't happened. Just nothing. But my hands were shaking, and we both knew I was lying. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of routine, punctuated by moments of sharp, irrational awareness. Every time the elevator chimed, my heart would jump. Every dark suit that passed my desk would make my breath catch. But Dominic Valentino didn't return to Romano and Associates, and slowly, gradually, I convinced myself that the encounter had meant nothing. A powerful man being politely generous to someone beneath his notice. Nothing more. Until Marcus. I met him at the coffee shop where I worked my second job, pulling espresso shots and burning my fingers on steam wands from 4 to midnight 3 days a week. He was a regular, mid-30s, kind smile, worked in advertising, always left good tips and made small talk that felt genuine rather than predatory. When he asked me to dinner, I'd said yes because I was 26 and tired, and so desperately lonely that even the prospect of mediocre Italian food and awkward conversation felt like salvation. The restaurant he chose was nice. Too nice for someone like me, really, with its white tablecloths and wine list that required translation. I'd worn my navy dress again, the same painful heels, had even splurged on a cab because the subway felt too gritty for where we were going. Marcus was already waiting, standing when I arrived, pulling out my chair with the careful courtesy of someone trying very hard to make a good impression. We talked about nothing important, his job, my jobs, the weather, the impossibility of finding affordable rent in Manhattan, normal things, safe things. Things that didn't make my pulse race or my hands shake or my mind conjure images of dark eyes and darker promises. I was almost relaxed when the temperature in the restaurant dropped. Not literally. The air conditioning hummed along at the same steady rate. But something shifted. Some fundamental change in atmospheric pressure that made the conversations around us stutter and die. Marcus was mid-sentence, talking about a campaign he was working on, when his words trailed off, his gaze sliding past my shoulder toward the entrance. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to stay still, to remain invisible, to somehow fold myself into the background until whatever was happening passed me by. But I could feel him, feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch between my shoulder blades, burning through the thin fabric of my dress. Slowly, dreading what I'd find, I turned in my chair. Dominic Valentino stood in the doorway of the restaurant, flanked by his ever-present shadows. He'd removed his suit jacket, the sleeves of his black dress shirt rolled to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and marked with ink I couldn't quite make out from this distance. His hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something in his expression, something cold and terrible and barely contained, that made my blood freeze. He was looking at Marcus the way a wolf looks at something that's wandered too close to its territory. Then his eyes found mine, and the world tilted sideways. The fury in his gaze was a living thing, coiled and deadly, but beneath it lurked something worse. Betrayal. As though I'd committed some unforgivable transgression by sitting across from Marcus in this ambient-lit restaurant with its soft piano music and innocent first-date energy. He moved toward our table with the inevitability of a storm front, his bodyguards creating a buffer zone that made other diners instinctively lean away, conversations dying mid-word. The maitre d' appeared from nowhere, hands fluttering uselessly, but one look from the refrigerator-shaped guard sent him scurrying backward. Miss Chen. My name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. He stopped beside our table, so close I could smell that cedar and smoke cologne, could feel the heat radiating from him despite the careful control in his posture. An unexpected pleasure. It was the least pleasurable thing anyone had ever said to me. Marcus started to stand, some instinct for self-preservation finally kicking in despite his obvious confusion. I'm sorry, do you... Sit. One word. Flat. Absolute. Marcus sat like a puppet with cut strings. My fingers twisted the napkin in my lap, the linen growing damp with sweat. Mr. Valentino, I didn't expect to see you here, clearly. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Those dark eyes swept over Marcus with the clinical assessment of someone deciding exactly how to dispose of a problem, then back to me. And the intensity there made me want to crawl under the table. We need to discuss the Castellano files. Now. It was a lie. A transparent, paper-thin lie. The Castellano files had been handled weeks ago, filed away in Romano's office where they'd probably never be touched again. But something in his tone, in the coiled tension in his shoulders, told me that arguing would be catastrophic. I'm actually in the middle of, now, Miss Chen. Not loud. He didn't need volume. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward, silencing the entire restaurant. Marcus found his voice, though it emerged thin and uncertain. Listen, buddy. We're just having dinner. The lean bodyguard moved, not threateningly, just a subtle shift in position that put him between Marcus and me, one hand resting casually inside his jacket where I knew, God help me, I knew, something lethal waited. It's okay. I heard myself say the words from somewhere far away, watching this scene unfold like a spectator in my own life. It's work. I'm sorry, Marcus. I should have mentioned I might need to. You didn't mention anything. Dominic's voice sliced through my rambling excuse, sharp as broken glass. He pulled out my chair himself, dismissing Marcus's existence entirely. Come. My car is outside. Every rational cell in my brain screamed at me to refuse, to make a scene, to demand he leave, to cling to this normal date with this normal man who worked in advertising and probably filed taxes on time and had never made anyone disappear in the middle of the night. But I stood, picked up my purse with trembling fingers, avoided Marcus's bewildered gaze as Dominic's hand found the small of my back, possessive, scorching through the thin fabric, and guided me toward the exit. Wait. Marcus half rose again. Should I call you? Are you... No, Dominic didn't even glance back. You will not call her. You will not contact her. You will forget you ever met her. Capisci? The last word emerged in Italian, harsh and final, and I felt Marcus's protest die before it could form. The night air hit me like a slap. humid and thick, carrying the scent of exhaust and distant rain. A black SUV idled at the curb, windows tinted so dark they might as well have been painted. The refrigerator guard opened the rear door, and Dominic's hand at my back became insistent, propelling me forward. "Get in." "I don't—" My voice cracked. "I don't understand what's happening." "You don't need to understand. You need to obey." He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear, and I felt myself shaking, from fear or something worse, I couldn't tell. "Get in the car. Elena." My first name. He'd used my first name, intimate and terrifying, and something inside me simply broke or surrendered. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil, the seats soft enough to sink into. Dominic slid in beside me, close enough that his thigh pressed against mine, the contact electric even through layers of fabric. The door closed with the heavy thunk of reinforced metal, sealing us in semi-darkness broken only by the passing streetlights. The driver pulled away from the curb without needing instructions, and I realized with creeping horror that this had been planned. The SUV had been waiting. Dominic had known I'd be at that restaurant, at that time, with that man. He'd been watching me. 3 weeks. His voice came from the darkness beside me, low and dangerous. "I gave you 3 weeks to use that card, to call me, to acknowledge what happened between us. Nothing happened between us." The protest emerged automatically, desperate. "You gave me a business card, that's all." "That's all?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Kara, when I give a woman my private number, when I stop at her desk twice in front of witnesses, when I tell her she has value, that is not nothing. That is everything." The SUV turned down a side street, away from the bright avenues, into neighborhoods where streetlights grew sparse and buildings hunched together like conspirators. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rabbit quick. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk without interruption. Without some advertising executive with soft hands and softer spine, thinking he has any right to touch what's mine." "I'm not yours." The words came out weaker than I'd intended, undermined by the tremor in my voice. He shifted, and suddenly his hand was on my chin, fingers firm but not painful, turning my face toward him. In the dim light, his eyes were fathomless, pupils blown wide, and I could see the rigid control he was exercising over himself. Could see it in the tension in his jaw, the careful deliberation of his movements. "You became mine the moment you looked at me in that office, the moment I saw you, exhausted, proud, wearing shoes that don't fit because you're too stubborn to admit you can't afford better ones. Working yourself to death for people who don't even know your name." His thumb brushed my lower lip, and I gasped despite myself. "You think I don't know about your 3 jobs? Your studio apartment in Queens with the broken radiator? The student loans you're drowning under? How do you—" Terror crystallized into something sharp and specific. "You investigated me? I protect what's mine. Matter of fact. Unapologetic. And you needed protecting, even if you were too foolish to realize it." The SUV stopped. We were somewhere in the meatpacking district, I thought, though the darkness and disorientation made it hard to be certain. An unmarked door in a brick building, a single security camera angled downward, no signs or identifying marks. The refrigerator guard opened my door, and Dominic's hand returned to my back, guiding me out onto the sidewalk. My heels clicked against concrete that gleamed wet from earlier rain, and I had the wild, irrational thought that this was it. This was the moment I disappeared into one of those true crime podcasts I'd secretly listened to during late-night subway rides. But the interior of the building contradicted my fears. Hardwood floors, exposed brick, industrial lighting that cast everything in warm amber, a freight elevator with brass fixtures that gleamed like old gold. Dominic pressed the button for the top floor, and we ascended in silence heavy enough to suffocate. The penthouse, because of course it was a penthouse, was sparse but expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, minimal furniture that probably cost more than my car would have if I'd owned a car. Art on the walls that I vaguely recognized from museum visits in college. Everything in shades of gray and black and deep burgundy, like living inside a bruise. "Drink." Dominic moved to a bar cart near the windows, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses without waiting for my answer. I should go home, but I didn't move toward the elevator. Couldn't seem to make my feet work. He turned, extending 1 glass toward me. You should drink this. You're shaking. I was. My whole body trembled like something coming apart at the seams. I took the glass because refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting. Let the whiskey burn down my throat in 1 desperate swallow. It hit my empty stomach like napalm, spreading warmth and false courage through my limbs. Why am I here? The question emerged steadier than I felt. What do you want from me? Dominic studied me over the rim of his own glass, and I watched something shift in his expression. The fury banking down into something darker, more patient, infinitely more dangerous. Everything. He set down his glass with deliberate care. I want everything, Elena. Your time, your attention, your safety, your future. He moved closer, backing me against the windows, the city sprawling beneath us like a carpet of stars. I want you to stop working yourself into an early grave. I want you to stop dating boys who can't protect you. I want you to understand that from the moment I saw you, you stopped belonging to yourself. That's insane. But my voice had gone breathy, unconvincing even to my own ears. You don't even know me. I know you're 26 and you graduated summa cum laude from NYU with a degree in international business. I know your father died when you were 19 and left you with nothing but debts. I know you send money to your mother in San Francisco every month even though you can barely feed yourself. I know you take the Q train home at 1 a.m. 3 nights a week, and you keep your keys between your fingers like they'll save you if someone decides to make you a victim. His hand came up, cupping my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. I know you're drowning, Kara, and I'm offering you a lifeline. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and shameful. What kind of lifeline comes with bodyguards and threats and dragging someone out of a restaurant? The kind that keeps you alive, the kind that keeps you safe. His forehead dropped to mine, and I could feel the tremor running through him. Barely contained violence or desire, impossible to distinguish. That man tonight, Marcus. You think he was coincidence? You think he just happened to start frequenting your coffee shop? Just happened to ask you out? Just happened to choose that specific restaurant? Ice flooded my veins. What are you saying? I'm saying that my enemies are creative. They know I've claimed you. They know that hurting you would hurt me. His voice dropped to something raw and dangerous. And I'm saying that if he'd touched you, if he'd gotten you alone, if he'd completed whatever his orders were, I would have burned this entire city to find the ones responsible. The words should have terrified me. Should have sent me running for that elevator, screaming for help, calling the police whose jurisdiction probably ended where Dominic Valentino's influence began. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, into the solid reality of him, into the terrifying certainty that everything I'd thought I knew about my life had been an illusion, and he was offering me something real, even if that reality came wrapped in darkness. I can't be what you want, I whispered against his chest. I don't know how to be part of your world. Then I'll teach you. His arms came around me, caging me against him, and I felt surrounded, consumed, utterly claimed. But first, you need to understand something, Elena. You don't get to date other men. You don't get to put yourself in danger. You don't get to disappear from my sight again. His hand fisted in my hair, tilting my head back until I met his eyes. You're mine now. Say it. The words stuck in my throat, equal parts protest and surrender. Say it. And God help me. I did. I'm yours. The words hung between us like a contract signed in blood, irrevocable and binding. Dominic's grip in my hair softened, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw with a reverence that contradicted the possession in his eyes. For a long moment, we simply breathed the same air, suspended in that space between surrender and consequence. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He released me with visible reluctance, stepping back to answer it in rapid Italian, his voice clipped and authoritative. I caught fragments. Names I didn't recognize, places that meant nothing to me, numbers that sounded like money or guns or both. When he finished, His expression had shifted into something colder, more remote. The man who'd held me was gone, replaced by whatever he became when conducting business. I probably didn't want to understand. "Marco will take you home." He gestured toward the lean bodyguard who'd materialized silently from somewhere in the penthouse. "Pack a bag, enough for a week. He'll bring you back here tomorrow morning." "Wait, what? I can't just—" "You can. You will." He was already moving toward a door I hadn't noticed, pulling on a shoulder holster that gleamed dull black in the ambient light. "Something requires my attention. When I return, we'll discuss the terms of our arrangement." "Terms? This isn't a business deal." He crossed back to me in 3 strides, caught my face between his palms, and kissed me. Hard, claiming, a brand that seared itself into my consciousness and left me gasping when he pulled away. "Everything is a business deal, Kara. The sooner you understand that, the easier this becomes, then softer, almost gentle. Trust me. Let me keep you safe. Let me give you the life you deserve instead of the one you're killing yourself to maintain." And then he was gone, the refrigerator guard following, leaving me alone with Marco and the dizzying realization that my life had just been dismantled and rebuilt, according to specifications I'd never agreed to. Marco drove me home in silence, the SUV gliding through late-night traffic like a shark through dark water. My studio apartment in Queens looked even more pathetic through his eyes. The peeling paint, the flickering hallway light, the smell of someone else's cooking seeping through thin walls. He waited in the hallway, hands clasped, while I stuffed clothes into my worn duffel bag with shaking fingers. What was I doing? What had I agreed to? But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt dangerously like relief. Morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Marco collected me at 8, wordless and efficient, and drove me back to the meatpacking district through streets that looked different in daylight. Less menacing, almost ordinary. The penthouse, too, seemed changed. Sunlight streamed through those massive windows, illuminating details I'd missed in last night's darkness. Photographs on a shelf, books in Italian and English, a kitchen that looked actually used rather than decorative. And Dominic, standing by the windows with a phone pressed to his ear, still wearing last night's clothes. He looked exhausted, hair disheveled, stubble darkening his jaw, but somehow even more dangerous for the wear. When he saw me, something in his expression eased. He ended his call mid-sentence. "You came. Did I have a choice?" But there was no heat in the question. We both knew I'd chosen this the moment I'd gotten in his car last night. There's always a choice, Elena. You could have run, called the police, disappeared into one of those women's shelters you probably researched at 3 a.m. when you couldn't sleep. He moved toward me, and I caught the scent of gunpowder beneath his cologne. Faint, but unmistakable. But you didn't. You're here. Why? Because I was tired. Because 3 jobs and student loans and a future that looked like drowning had worn me down to nothing. Because when he'd held me last night, I'd felt safer than I had in years, despite every logical reason to feel the opposite. Because some broken part of me wanted to be claimed. I don't know, I whispered. Yes, you do. He reached for my bag, setting it aside before taking my hands in his. They were warm, calloused, marked with scars I wanted to trace and understand. You know exactly why. You just don't want to admit it yet. A woman appeared from the kitchen, older, severe-looking, dressed in elegant black. She surveyed me with sharp eyes that missed nothing, then spoke to Dominic in Italian. He responded in the same language, his tone deferential in a way I hadn't heard from him before. "This is Julia," he told me, switching to English. "She manages my household. She'll help you settle in, show you where everything is. Anything you need, you ask her." "I'm not moving in." "Yes, you are." He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Your studio apartment is no longer safe. Marcus wasn't the only one watching you. Until I've eliminated the threat, you stay here, under my protection. Non-negotiable. My jobs are over, all 3 of them. I've already made arrangements." At my expression of pure panic, He softened fractionally. You'll work for me. Officially. Salary, benefits, everything legitimate. Romano is expecting your resignation this morning. Julia has already drafted it. You can't just... I can. I have. This is happening, Elena. Fight me if you need to, but understand that I will win. I always win when it comes to protecting what's mine. Julia said something else in Italian, sharper this time, and Dominic actually smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from marble into something almost human. He replied in that same language, then turned back to me. She says I'm scaring you. She's probably right. His thumb brushed my cheekbone. But fear is honest. Fear means you understand the situation. That's good. That keeps you careful. He kissed my forehead, lingering, breathing me in like he needed to memorize my scent. Then he was moving away, shrugging into a fresh jacket that Julia had apparently retrieved from somewhere, checking a gun I tried very hard not to look at directly. I have business. I'll return tonight. Julia will take you shopping. You need clothes, proper shoes, whatever else you want. My card. He pressed a black Amex into my palm, the metal cold and heavy. No limit. Don't insult me by being modest. And then he was gone again, leaving me standing in his penthouse with his housekeeper and a credit card that felt like a collar disguised as generosity. Julia spoke limited English, but her meaning came through clearly enough. She showed me the guest room, my room now, apparently, with its king-sized bed and adjoining bathroom and closet bigger than my entire former apartment. She unpacked my pathetic duffel with the efficiency of someone who'd seen worse, hanging my thrift store clothes among empty hangers that seemed to mock their inadequacy. Then she handed me espresso in a tiny cup, strong enough to strip paint, and gestured for me to follow. The shopping trip was surreal. We went to stores I'd only ever walked past, where salespeople materialized like genies and price tags were discreetly absent. Julia directed everything with the authority of a general commanding troops. Dresses, pants, blouses, shoes that actually fit, undergarments made of silk and lace that felt like sin against my skin. I tried to protest, to set limits, but she simply waved the Amex like a magic wand that obliterated objections. Dominic wants, she said in her fractured English. You accept, is simple. But it wasn't simple. Every purchase felt like another link in a chain I was forging around myself. Every beautiful thing, and they were beautiful, devastatingly so, felt like a gilded bar in a cage I couldn't quite see yet. We returned to the penthouse laden with bags and boxes, and Julia immediately set about preparing lunch. Real food, pasta, and fresh bread and vegetables that hadn't come from a can. I sat at the kitchen island, watching her work, trying to process the last 24 hours. How long have you worked for him? I asked. She paused, considering her words carefully. Many years, since he was boy. I know his mother. Something complicated crossed her face. He is good man, dangerous man, but good, protects family, protects what matters. I'm not family. Her laugh was dry, knowing. Not yet. But he decided. When Dominic decides is finished, you are his now. The words should have sparked rebellion. Instead, they settled into my chest like stones, heavy and permanent. That afternoon, I tried to make sense of my new reality. I called my coffee shop, stammered through an excuse about a family emergency, and needing to quit immediately. My manager was surprisingly understanding, which made me wonder if Dominic's influence had reached there too. My other jobs, the weekend retail position, the data entry I did from home, dissolved with similar ease, as though my old life was made of paper and someone had simply crumpled it up and thrown it away. I called my mother, told her I'd gotten a new position, that I'd be busy for a while, that I'd call soon, lied with a smoothness that surprised me. Her relief at hearing I wouldn't be working 3 jobs anymore made guilt twist in my stomach. By evening, I was exhausted from anxiety rather than physical labor, a different kind of tired, more insidious. Julia had prepared dinner and then departed, leaving me alone in the penthouse with instructions in broken English that Dominic would return late, that I should eat, that I should rest. I did neither. Instead, I stood by those massive windows and watched the city light up like a constellation fallen to earth, wondering where he was, what he was doing, whether the gunpowder I'd smelled this morning had been from last night or something more recent. The elevator chimed at 11. Dominic entered like a storm that had exhausted itself. Slower than usual, the carefully controlled violence dimmed to something closer to mere exhaustion. His jacket was gone, his shirt partially unbuttoned, dried blood on his knuckles that he hadn't bothered to wash off. He stopped when he saw me, just stood there, drinking in the sight of me in his space, wearing one of the new dresses Julia had insisted on. Simple black, nothing special, but the way his eyes darkened told me it was enough. "You're still awake." I couldn't sleep. I moved toward him without conscious decision, my body responding to something my brain hadn't caught up with yet. "Are you hurt?" "This isn't mine." He held up his bloodied hand dismissively. "The problem has been handled." I didn't ask what problem, didn't want to know. Instead, I took his hand, led him to the kitchen sink, ran warm water over his knuckles until the blood swirled away down the drain. He let me tend to him, standing utterly still except for the rapid pulse I could feel in his wrist. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Julia, I want to." And I realized with dawning horror and something else that I meant it, that some instinct I didn't understand wanted to care for this dangerous man, to be the softness in his hard-edged world. When his hands were clean, I dried them carefully with a dish towel. He caught my wrist, pulled me against him, buried his face in my hair. "I killed someone tonight." His voice was muffled, raw. "The man who sent Marcus, the one who thought he could use you to get to me." He pulled back, forced me to meet his eyes. "I want you to understand what that means, what I am, what being with me means. I understand. Do you?" His grip tightened. "Do you understand that anyone who looks at you wrong, who threatens you, who even thinks about hurting you, I will destroy them? That there is no limit to what I'll do to keep you safe? That you've become the most dangerous weakness I've ever allowed myself?" The confession hung between us, raw and bleeding. I should have been horrified, should have recognized this for the obsession it was, the possessive madness that would consume us both. Instead, I kissed him. He responded like a man starving, one hand fisting in my hair, the other spanning my waist, crushing me against him until I couldn't tell where I ended and he began. The kiss was brutal, desperate, tasting of violence and need, and something that might have been surrender from us both. When we broke apart, both gasping, his forehead rested against mine. "Say it again," he demanded. "Say you're mine." "I'm yours." Easier this time. Almost true. "And I'm yours, Kara. Every dark, damaged, dangerous piece of me. Yours." It was a vow and a warning, and a promise of destruction, and I accepted it with eyes wide open. The days bled into each other with a rhythm I'd never known before. Languid mornings in silk sheets that cost more than my former monthly rent. Afternoons learning the geography of Dominic's world. Evenings that belonged to him entirely. Julia became my unlikely guide, teaching me things I'd never needed to know. Which fork to use at formal dinners. How to move through rooms full of dangerous men without drawing the wrong kind of attention. Which questions to never ask. "You see nothing. You hear nothing. You speak nothing," she instructed during our third day together, her English improving when the subject matter demanded clarity. "This is how you stay safe. This is how you stay alive." But Dominic wanted the opposite. He wanted me to see everything, to understand exactly what he was, as though my acceptance might somehow absolve him. Late at night, when exhaustion stripped away his carefully maintained control, he'd tell me things. About territory disputes and old vendettas, about the weight of a name like Valentino, and what it meant to carry it in a world where tradition and blood mattered more than law. "My father built this empire on corpses," he said one night, his head in my lap as I ran my fingers through his hair. We were on the penthouse balcony, the city spread below us like a kingdom he ruled from the shadows. He believed in the old ways, omerta, respect, family above everything. His voice went hard. And then he was murdered by someone he considered a brother, someone he trusted. My fingers stilled. "How old were you?" 17. Old enough to inherit, too young to know what that inheritance would cost. He caught my hand, pressed it against his chest where I could feel his heartbeat. Steady, relentless. I spent the next decade finding everyone involved. Every man who pulled a trigger, who drove a car, who even knew it was going to happen and said nothing. Do you want to know what I did to them? No, the answer came quickly, instinctively. Some things, once known, couldn't be unknown. He smiled against my palm, bitter and knowing. Smart girl. But you need to understand, that capacity for violence, that need for absolute control, it doesn't turn off. It's who I am, what I am. And now you're part of that, I know. Do you? He sat up, turning to face me fully. The city lights cast his face in sharp relief, all angles and shadows. Because in 3 days, you're going to meet my family. My mother, my sisters, my cousins, the whole Valentino machine. And they're going to look at you and see exactly what you are. A poor Chinese girl from Queens who worked 3 jobs to survive. They're going to question why I've claimed you. What you could possibly offer that their carefully selected debutantes couldn't. The words stung despite his matter-of-fact delivery. Then why have you claimed me? Something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability breaking through the hardness like light through cracks. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to fight, to sacrifice, to carry weight that would break other people. His hand cupped my face with devastating gentleness. You remind me that strength isn't just about power and fear. Sometimes it's about getting up every morning and choosing to keep going even when everything in you wants to quit. Tears burned behind my eyes. I'm not strong. I'm terrified. Of you, of this world, of what I'm becoming. What you're becoming is mine, completely, irrevocably mine. And I will burn down anyone who makes you feel less than extraordinary. He kissed me then, slow and deep, tasting like whiskey and dark promises. Let them question. Let them judge. You're wearing my protection now, Kara. That makes you untouchable. But 3 days later, standing in the marble foyer of the Valentino estate in Westchester, I felt anything but untouchable. The house, mansion really, sprawled across manicured grounds like something from a different era. Old money and older blood, the kind of establishment that had seen generations of power consolidate and corrupt. Dominic's hand at the small of my back was the only thing keeping me from fleeing back to the SUV. Breathe, he murmured against my ear. They're going to love you. You're a terrible liar. His laugh was low, genuine. Yes, but they'll respect you. That's more important. The door opened before we could knock, revealing a woman who could only be Dominic's mother. She had his eyes, that same dark intensity, but softened by age and what looked like carefully maintained composure. Her gaze swept over me with the precision of a jeweler appraising a stone of questionable origin. Mama. Dominic kissed both her cheeks, his deference clear. This is Elena Chen. Elena, my mother, Isabella Valentino. Mrs. Valentino. I extended my hand, grateful Julia had drilled me on proper etiquette. Thank you for having me. She took my hand briefly, her skin cool and dry. Dominic speaks of little else. I was beginning to think you were a ghost. Her English was perfect, barely accented, and sharp enough to draw blood. Please, come in. The family is eager to meet the woman who has captured my son's attention. The word hung there, weighted with implications I didn't want to examine. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. Antiques and oil paintings, marble and mahogany, the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Voices carried from somewhere deeper in the house. Italian mixing with English, laughter that sounded both warm and dangerous. We entered what Isabella called the salon, and conversation stopped. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Dominic's sisters, unmistakable with their dark hair and sharp features. Various cousins and uncles, men who wore their suits like uniforms and watched me with the flat assessment of soldiers evaluating a potential threat. Everyone. Dominic's voice cut through the silence, carrying authority that made even his elders straighten slightly. This is Elena. She's under my protection. Treat her accordingly. It was both introduction and warning, and the room understood. The women moved forward first, his sisters, younger than him by several years, beautiful in that casually devastating way that came from good genes and better skincare. They kissed my cheeks, murmured welcomes that sounded sincere enough, but I caught the glances they exchanged. the silent conversations happening in the spaces between words. Dinner was an exercise in survival. I sat at Dominic's right hand, a position of honor that wasn't lost on anyone, and navigated courses I couldn't pronounce while fielding questions designed to expose my inadequacy. Where did I go to school? What did my family do? How did Dominic and I meet? I answered honestly. NYU on scholarship. My father had been a restaurant manager before he died. We'd met through his business with Romano and Associates. Each answer seemed to confirm their suspicions. I was nobody. Nothing. A temporary fascination who'd be replaced once Dominic remembered his station. But Dominic's hand found mine beneath the table, squeezing reassurance. And when his cousin, a sharp-faced man named Luca, made a comment in Italian that brought knowing smirks to several faces, Dominic's response was ice. In English, cousin. Elena is family now. We don't exclude family. Luca's smirk faded. I was merely commenting on how refreshing it is to see you with someone so different from your usual type. My usual type was chosen by matchmakers concerned with bloodlines and business mergers. Dominic's voice could have frozen wine. Elena, I chose myself. That should tell you everything you need to know about her value. The table went silent. Isabella's fork paused halfway to her mouth. One of Dominic's sisters, the youngest, I thought her name was Gabriella, looked like she was trying not to smile. Dominic, Isabella said carefully, you cannot mean... I mean exactly what you think I mean. He turned to me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Elena has agreed to be my wife. The engagement will be announced next month. The room erupted. I sat frozen, his words echoing in my head. Wife, engagement, next month. We'd never discussed this, never even hinted at it. This was insane, moving too fast. A decision made without my input, but his hand tightened on mine, and when I looked at him, I saw the challenge in his eyes, the question. The demand for trust even when every logical bone in my body screamed that this was madness. You should have consulted the family first, Luca was saying, his voice tight with poorly concealed anger. This kind of alliance requires approval. I don't require approval. Dominic's words fell like stones. I'm telling you out of respect for tradition, not asking permission. Elena will be my wife. Anyone who has a problem with that can address it with me, privately. The threat was unmistakable. Several of the men exchanged glances, some calculation happening that I couldn't read. Isabella looked like she'd bitten into something unexpectedly bitter. Only Gabriella seemed delighted, raising her wineglass with a grin. Well, I think it's romantic, and God knows this family could use some new blood before we all turn into the same person. A few nervous laughs, and gradually, conversation resumed. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn. Dominic had declared his intention, and I understood with sinking clarity that I'd just been dragged into something far bigger than a penthouse romance. The ride home was silent. Dominic stared out the window, jaw tight, while I processed the magnitude of what had just happened. When we finally entered the penthouse, he poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and downed it in one swallow. You're angry, he said without turning around. You think? My voice came out sharper than intended. You just announced our engagement without ever actually, proposing, without asking if that's what I wanted, without, do you want to go back? He spun to face me, and I saw the raw need in his expression, the desperation beneath the control. Do you want to return to those 3 jobs? That apartment? That life where you were invisible and exhausted and alone? Because I can arrange that. I can make it like we never met. You'll be safe, protected from a distance, but free. That's not. Or you can stay. Be my wife. Let me give you everything. Safety, comfort, purpose, a family that will eventually accept you because they'll have no choice. Let me love you the only way I know how, which is completely and obsessively and probably not healthily. He crossed to me, caught my face between his hands. I know I'm a bastard for doing it this way. I know I should have asked, should have courted you properly, should have given you the romance you deserve instead of making declarations at family dinners like you're territory I'm claiming. I am territory you're claiming, I whispered. Yes, no apology in the word. But you're also the first thing in 15 years that's made me feel like something other than my father's ghost. You're the first person who looks at me and sees Dominic before seeing Valentino. And I'm selfish enough, possessive enough, broken enough to trap you in my world. Because the alternative, letting you go, would kill something in me I didn't know still existed. His forehead pressed to mine, and I felt him trembling. This powerful, dangerous man who killed without hesitation, shaking like a child afraid of abandonment. "Say yes," he breathed. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I can be worthy of you, even though we both know I'm not. Let me protect you and possess you and probably drive you insane with my need to control everything. Just say yes." It was the worst proposal in the history of proposals. Coercive and possessive and completely lacking in the romance every girl supposedly dreamed of. And yet, yes. The word escaped before I could stop it, and I watched relief crash over his features like a wave. "Yes, I'll marry you, but on one condition. Anything. You never make decisions about my life without talking to me first again. I'm not a chess piece you move around your board. If we're doing this, if I'm really going to be your wife, then you treat me like a partner, not property." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Deal. Though I should warn you, old habits die hard, then I'll kill them myself." I surprised us both with the fierceness in my voice. "I might have agreed to be yours, Dominic, but that means you're mine too. And I protect what's mine." His laugh was raw, genuine, transforming his face into something almost beautiful. "God help anyone who underestimates you, cara mia." He kissed me then, and it tasted like promises we'd probably break, and futures we'd fight for, and a love that would likely destroy us both. But for the first time since my father died, I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was wrapped in darkness and blood and beautiful, terrible obsession. The engagement ring appeared 2 days later, a stunning emerald flanked by diamonds, set in platinum that caught the light like captured fire. Dominic slid it onto my finger over breakfast, casual as though he was passing the salt, but I caught the tension in his shoulders, the way he watched my face for reaction. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She was the only one in the family who married for love instead of strategy. My grandfather gave her this the day after he decided she was worth more than the alliance her father offered." His thumb traced the stone. "She wore it for 60 years. Never took it off, even when he died. Said it reminded her that some things are worth fighting for." I stared at the ring, at the weight of history and expectation it carried. What if I'm not worth fighting for? Then I've already lost the only battle that matters. He lifted my hand, pressed his lips to my knuckles just below the ring. "But you are, Elena. You're worth everything." The next weeks moved with dreamlike intensity. Julia transformed into a drill sergeant, preparing me for the life I'd inherited. Italian lessons, because the family switched languages deliberately when they wanted to exclude outsiders, and I would not be an outsider. Etiquette beyond what she'd already taught me. The histories and hierarchies of families allied with the Valentinos, the ones at war with them, the delicate neutral parties who could shift allegiances with a single insult. "You represent him now," she said one afternoon, correcting my posture for the 100th time. "How you dress, how you speak, how you carry yourself, all of this reflects on Dominic. His enemies will look for weakness. You cannot give them any." But the real education came from Dominic himself, in those late-night hours when exhaustion stripped away his filters. He taught me to read the room at business dinners, to identify who held real power versus who merely postured. He showed me the scars he carried, bullet wound in his shoulder from a territorial dispute 3 years ago, knife slash across his ribs from an assassination attempt when he was 21, the burn marks on his forearm from something he wouldn't discuss except to say the men responsible died screaming. "You need to understand what you're marrying into," he said, tracing my collarbone with fingers that could kill but touched me like porcelain. "This life, it's not just luxury and protection. It's constant vigilance. It's knowing that people will smile at you while planning your destruction. It's accepting that the man you love will sometimes have blood on his hands, that no amount of washing will cleanse." I know. And I did. The naivety I'd carried into his world had burned away, replaced by something harder, more clear-eyed. "I'm not afraid anymore. You should be." But he kissed me anyway, deep and desperate, like he was trying to consume the parts of me that remained untainted by his darkness. The wedding was planned for October, small by Valentino standards, but still over 200 guests, each one carefully selected for political or strategic value. Isabella had taken over most arrangements with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops, and though she remained coolly polite to me, I caught moments of something softer, approval maybe, when I handled a confrontational cousin with grace, or genuine warmth when I brought her tea without being asked, remembering from Julia that she preferred jasmine in the afternoons. But not everyone in the family had accepted my presence. Luca, especially, watched me with barely concealed hostility. I caught him in conversation with other cousins more than once, voices dropping when I approached, glances that lingered too long and held too much calculation. "He's planning something," I told Dominic one night, 3 weeks before the wedding. We were in his study, my study too now, the one room in the penthouse he'd completely reorganized to accommodate my presence. My books shared shelves with his ledgers. My laptop sat beside his firearms, my presence seeping into his spaces until we'd become inextricably tangled. I know. He didn't look up from the documents he was reviewing, but his jaw tightened. Marco has been monitoring him. Whatever move he's planning, he'll make it soon. He knows once we're married, touching you means war with the entire organization. So I'm bait. The words came out flat, resigned. No. His head snapped up, eyes fierce. You're my future wife, and anyone who threatens you forfeits their life. Luca included, blood or not. But I could see the tension in him, the weight of choosing between family loyalty and the woman he'd claimed. It was tearing him apart, even if he'd never admit it. The confrontation came 5 days before the wedding, at what was supposed to be a simple family dinner at the estate. I'd grown comfortable enough with these gatherings to relax slightly, to actually enjoy Gabriella's sharp wit and even exchange pleasantries with Isabella about flower arrangements and seating charts. We were between courses when Luca stood, wineglass in hand, calling for attention. "A toast," he announced, smile sharp as broken glass, "to Dominic and his bride-to-be. May their union bring the Valentino family everything it deserves." Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. Dominic's hand found mine beneath the table, gripping hard enough to hurt. "Luca," Isabella said warningly, "sit down." "In a moment, Aunt Isabella. You see, I've been doing some research into our dear Elena's background, making sure she's worthy of the Valentino name." He pulled out his phone, swiping through screens with theatrical precision. And I discovered something fascinating. Elena's father, before his unfortunate death, had quite the gambling problem, owed money all over Chinatown. Money to some very interesting people. Ice flooded my veins. My father's debts had been the reason I'd worked myself to exhaustion, trying to clean up the mess he'd left behind. But I'd thought that history was buried, irrelevant to my new life. Among his creditors, Luca continued, voice dripping false sympathy, was a man named Tommy Wu, small-time operator, mostly loan sharking and protection rackets. Not someone the Valentinos would normally notice, except... He paused for maximum effect. Except that 3 months ago, Tommy Wu made contact with the Calabrese family, our enemies, and they've been very interested in any leverage they might have over us. Dominic was on his feet before I could process the words, moving around the table with deadly intent. But Luca held up a hand, still smiling that terrible smile. "I'm not finished. You see, Elena's father didn't just owe Tommy Wu money. He owed him a favor, a big one. And when he died without paying, that debt passed to his daughter." He turned those shark's eyes on me. "Which means, dear cousin, that your fiancée is technically owned by a man who's now working with our enemies. She's a liability, a weapon they can activate whenever they choose." The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying, but all I could hear was the roaring in my ears, the way my carefully constructed new life was crumbling around me. "That's enough." Dominic's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He'd reached Luca, one hand fisted in his cousin's shirt, lifting him slightly off his feet. "You will retract those statements. You will apologize to Elena, and then you will explain why you've been feeding information to the Calabrese family for the past 6 months. The room went silent. Luca's face drained of color. I don't know what you're... Marco. Dominic didn't take his eyes off Luca. Show them. The lean bodyguard stepped forward, producing a tablet that he handed to Isabella. She scrolled through whatever evidence it contained, her expression growing colder with each passing second. You were supposed to be family, she said quietly, and the disappointment in her voice was more cutting than any rage. Blood before everything. That was your father's teaching, my brother's legacy. And you've betrayed it for what? Money, power, jealousy over Dominic's position. He's not fit to lead us. Luca's composure cracked, desperation bleeding through. He's weak, distracted by some nobody he found playing secretary. Under your leadership, we'd be at war with 3 families and destroyed within a year. Dominic released him with a shove that sent Luca stumbling backward. Your ambition has always exceeded your intelligence, cousin. That's why you were never considered for succession. That's why you'll never be anything more than a footnote in Valentino history. He turned to Isabella, and I saw him make the calculation. Saw the moment he chose me over blood. Luca needs to be handled, permanently. But that's not Elena's burden to bear. He crossed back to me, pulled me to my feet, keeping me close. The debt he mentioned, if it exists, will be settled. Tommy Wu will be compensated or eliminated, whichever is more efficient. The Calabresi family will be sent a message about attempting to use personal leverage, and Elena will be my wife, as planned, with every protection and honor the Valentino name can provide. And what of Luca? Isabella's question hung heavy. He's my nephew, your cousin. His father was your father's brother. He's a traitor. No hesitation in Dominic's voice, though I felt the tension vibrating through him. And traitors get one mercy. They get to choose how they die, quickly, with dignity, or slowly, as an example. Luca looked around wildly, seeking allies, but found only cold faces and colder eyes. Whatever support he'd thought he had evaporated like morning mist. You can't, he started. I already have. Dominic gestured, and 2 men I'd never seen before materialized from somewhere in the house. Take him. Let him make his choice. As they dragged Luca away, his protests fading into the depths of the estate, Isabella stood, moving toward us with measured steps. She stopped in front of me, studying my face with those eyes so like her son's. Did you know about this debt? She asked. No, ma'am. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My father's affairs were a mess when he died. I thought I'd paid off everyone. I never knew about Tommy Wu or any connection to... I gestured vaguely, unable to say the word criminals in a room full of exactly that. But if you had known, she pressed, if this man had approached you, demanded you work against my son, what would you have done? I met her eyes directly, channeling every ounce of strength I'd developed surviving in Dominic's world. I would have told Dominic immediately. And then I would have helped him destroy anyone who thought they could use me to hurt him. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite approval, but close. She reached out, took my left hand, studied the emerald ring that marked me as family. My mother-in-law wore this ring through 3 attempts on her life, 2 miscarriages, and the murder of her firstborn son, Isabella said quietly. She wore it through poverty and wealth, through wars and peace, through every dark moment this family endured. Do you understand what it means to wear it? It means I'm his, I said simply. Completely. And he's mine. And anyone who tries to break that will answer to both of us. She smiled then. Small, genuine, the first real warmth she'd shown me. Perhaps you are worthy of the Valentino name after all. She turned to Dominic. Finish this. Clean it up. And then marry this girl before she comes to her senses and runs. The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon, sunlight streaming through the cathedral windows like benediction. I wore ivory silk that cost more than my old car would have, held a bouquet of white roses that Gabriella had insisted matched my skin tone, and walked down an aisle lined with people who could destroy lives with phone calls. But all I saw was Dominic, waiting at the altar in a charcoal suit, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that would have terrified me 6 months ago. Now it felt like coming home. The ceremony was traditional, the words ancient, spoken in Latin that I'd learned phonetically for this moment. When the priest asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute. Luca's absence a ghost that haunted the edges, but didn't speak. And when Dominic kissed me, sealing our union before God and the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast, I tasted our future, dangerous and beautiful, and entirely ours. The reception was extravagant, excessive, exactly what Isabella had envisioned. We danced the traditional first dance, Dominic holding me like I might shatter, whispering promises against my ear that made me blush despite the crowd watching. "I will spend every day proving you made the right choice," he murmured. "I will give you safety, comfort, love. Everything I have is yours." "I don't want everything," I whispered back. "I just want you, the real you, not the performance." "Then you have me." His arms tightened. "For better or worse, mostly worse, knowing my life. I can handle worse, and I could." The girl who'd worked 3 jobs and worn shoes 2 sizes too small had been forged into something stronger, something that could stand beside a king of shadows and not flinch. Later, when the party had wound down and we'd escaped to the penthouse, our penthouse now, truly shared, Dominic carried me over the threshold with reverence that contradicted his usual controlled violence. "Mrs. Valentino," he said, testing the words. "My wife, your partner," I corrected. "Your equal, your choice. My everything." He set me down gently, cupped my face with hands that had killed, but held me like salvation. "I don't deserve you, Elena. I probably never will. But I swear on my father's grave, on the Valentino name, on everything I am, I will spend my life trying, then we're even," I said softly. "Because I don't deserve a man who looks at me like I'm worth burning the world down for. But here we are, he echoed. And then quieter. Luca made his choice. It was quick, painless, more mercy than he deserved, but he was family once. That had to mean something. I understood what it cost him to say that, to admit the burden of that choice. I pulled him down to me, kissed him with all the acceptance I could pour into the gesture. "We protect what's ours," I whispered against his lips. "That's what you taught me. That's what we do. And we don't apologize for it. When did you become so fierce?" But he was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. The moment a dangerous man dragged me out of a restaurant and made me his. I began unbuttoning his shirt, slow and deliberate. "Now stop talking and show your wife exactly what she signed up for." He did. And it was perfect and terrifying and completely ours. This life we'd built from obsession and survival, and something that might have been love or might have been madness but felt like both. 6 months later, I stood in the same cathedral where we'd married, Dominic's hand warm in mine, and watched Isabella cradle our daughter, premature but healthy, with my dark hair and Dominic's fierce eyes. "She has your stubbornness," Isabella said, something like affection softening her features. "God help us all. And his possessiveness," I added, watching how even as a newborn, she clutched at her grandmother's finger with surprising strength. "We're going to have our hands full." Dominic wrapped his arms around me from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. "Sofia Isabella Valentino," he murmured, "our daughter. Our future. Our hope," I corrected softly. "That this world can be better than the one that made you. With you as her mother, it will be." He turned me in his arms, kissed me softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes that night, for trusting me despite every reason not to, for being strong enough to stand beside me instead of cowering behind me, for giving me a family worth protecting instead of an empire worth destroying." His forehead pressed to mine. "For making me more than my father's ghost." I kissed him back, pouring 6 months of survival and triumph and hard-won partnership into it. Around us, the cathedral hummed with life, Gabriella cooing at her niece, Isabella actually smiling, guards stationed at every exit, because even joy required protection in our world. "I love you," I said, simple and true. "Even when you're insufferable and possessive and make unilateral decisions that drive me crazy, I love you," he returned. "Even when you challenge me in front of the family and refuse to let me fight your battles and insist on being treated like an equal instead of a treasure to be locked away." Good. I glanced at our daughter, at the life we'd created from darkness and obsession, Because we're in this together, for always. For always. He agreed. And standing there, in the cathedral where we'd bound ourselves together, surrounded by family that had learned to accept me and a daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved fiercely and protected absolutely, I understood something fundamental. This life would never be easy, would never be safe, would always carry the weight of violence and secrets and choices that haunted dark hours. But it was mine. Ours. Built from ashes and obsession and two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole, and that was enough. That was everything.